You're listening to Unmuted Love. Hi there, I'm Siah Clark, and with 35 years as a marriage and family therapist and 25 years as a parent of 2 children I brought home from the foster care system, I want to welcome you here to Unmuted Love Podcast, the one place where nothing is off limits to say out loud about parenting children from difficult beginnings.
Stop for a minute, stop and breathe for a minute. Long it over your head, try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute, who you wanna be for a minute. Don't get over your head, you're like everyone else, aren't you?
Sometimes it's real sweet around here, and sometimes it ain't so pretty, because this is 100% Unmuted Love. So let's go.
You'll be just
Hello, parents. Welcome to Unmuted Love. No, I'm not C. I'm Siah. I'm the podcast producer of this show. C is actually out of town this week, but we wanted to make sure that you guys still got a great episode of the show, especially as we're going into a brand new year. So what we've done today is put together a couple of clips from a couple of past episodes of just some little nuggets of wisdom from C. And we really hope that you'll enjoy these and that they'll give you a little boost as we're moving into the new year. So thanks so much for listening, and let's move into the first clip from episode 5.
Negativity grows when it's in the dark. Relationships that are broken grow more broken in the dark. So let's shed some light on it. Let's start to understand how to regulate, and let's begin to understand what healing a child from difficult beginnings means, so that some of that big, baffling, bewildering behavior can begin to lessen over time. So one of the things is coming back to this notion that children deserve respect. And respect really just means they deserve a regulated parent. Because when you're regulated, then you can parent in a way that's respectful. It doesn't mean that you get walked all over. It doesn't mean that you don't set limits, or that you don't have boundaries, or that they get to do any old thing they want. That's not what it means. But what it means is when in your parenting, you do it in a respectful way that doesn't cause more harm, that doesn't erode the felt safety further, that doesn't create more baffling behavior, because it is more punitive than it is healing. So parents, listen, you're not bad. If you find yourself yelling more of the time than you ever imagined possible, then it's okay. You are in a struggle with how to deal with regulation. And it's very simple, really. It's stopping. It's dropping your agenda for the moment and regulating. So if you have to write that down, I want you to do it. Stop, drop your agenda, and breathe. And don't speak. I used to put my hand over my mouth and tell myself inside my head, don't speak, don't speak, don't speak, until I could regulate. And that sounds ridiculous, but I also had little stickies all over the house that said, don't speak, don't speak, don't speak, because what would come out was this imprint from my childhood that I swore I wasn't going to say. So I need a reminder to just don't say anything until I could be calm. Of course, you get to get upset. You get to have your feelings, all of them. But dysregulated means, whoa, too big a feeling, right? Either so much feeling that you can't control your mind. You can't control your mouth because your mind is running wild. Or too much feeling so that you just collapse into giving up and throwing in the towel, and then your kids get the feeling that you don't believe in them. Right. So there are lots of things that can happen in a dysregulated state. You can scream and yell, you can hit your children, you can break things. You can also just collapse and go to bed and give up on them and tell them, I don't care, go do what you want. Neither of those two extremes are good for your kids. So the middle ground is always going to be the better way. And the middle ground has a lot of flexibility in it. Yes, you can speak with a loud voice. Yes, you can say it like you mean it. Yes, you can be gentle and kind in the face of upset. Yeah, you can do all of that. Everything you have is fine until it gets so far out of the window of tolerance. That's what it's called, the window of tolerance. You get so far outside that you're saying mean stuff, or you're throwing in the towel and saying, I don't care, I don't love you anyway. And you're just giving up. But you're giving up in such a way that it wounds that tender, fragile heart of that child that's already feeling like they're not particularly lovable in the first place. So parents, consider this. Consider just simple things. Don't make this more complicated than it is. Start with a simple mantra. Stop. Drop your agenda for right now. That means if you're hurrying them out the door, that's the agenda. Stop that for right now. Just stop and take some breaths until you can say, oh, you're having trouble getting your shoes on, babe. Can I help you? Let me help you get your shoes on, right? Which is a completely different thing than I'm going to stuff your feet into these shoes if you don't put them on yourself. That's a different dysregulated statement, right? So stop. Drop your agenda for the moment. Breathe until you can come back to it like the loving parent you know you are. That's number one. Simple, simple mantra to regulate yourself first. 2, think about attunement. What is attunement? Attunement is that inner subjective connection between a parent and a child. Now, when you have a child from difficult beginnings, that attunement's rough. It's not easy to get attunement, right? That means where you both feel seen and heard at the same time. It's a kind of mind-body sensing of the other, knowing the rhythm, knowing the affect and the experience, and just being so connected that it's like you're one in that moment. It's like a dance. But our kids have a hard time with that dance. And so we have to really perfect the notion of attunement, which is something that most of us have hardwired, unless, of course, we had trauma in the early years. But we're mostly hardwired for attachment. When a baby cries, we tend to want to soothe it. When a baby's hungry, we tend to want to feed it. When a baby is making goo-goo eyes at you, we tend to want to make goo-goo eyes back, right? That's an attunement that we have easily with babies. But children and parents need that throughout their childhood. And that attunement sometimes gets lost in the big, baffling, difficult, bewildering behavior. I totally understand that. But here's some simple things. This week, I just want you to practice 2 things. Just that mantra, stop, drop your agenda, take a breath before you speak, right? Don't speak until you're regulated. Then with soft eyes, soft face, a regulated tone, nice rhythm, nice cadence, a volume that's easy to hear, and choosing words that are gentle. I want you to directly make requests of your children, right? Just requests. Please put your shoes on. We're going to leave in 5 minutes. I'd like for you to be dressed, right? This is the sound of moving a child along without yelling at them or threatening them or letting things come out of your mouth that last a lifetime in terms of whether they feel loved or they don't feel loved. So parents, you are so important to this. Now, what I'm talking about is so basic. Maybe it seems too basic to you to be really meaningful, but I promise you the basics are where it's at. Go back to the basics. Start over with attunement. Start over with what you're thinking between your ears and watch your own dysregulation. Your dysregulation is the most important thing. So you have to get a handle on your own regulation strategies. What will you do? Now, some parents do all kinds of things. Some people meditate, some people take walks, some people do this deep breathing, some people do yoga, some people do big exercising, right? There are lots of things you can do. There are also a whole lot of neuro hacks that you can do, which I can teach you down the road. So you can decide what you do that's regulating for you. But the problem with most parents is they don't do what they know. So I want you to really think this week, what am I going to do that I already know? How can I stick some regulation back in my life? Because, woo, there's too much yelling going on. Woo, there's too much meanness going on. And half of it's coming from me, the parent.
The second clip we're going to play today is from episode 16. So let's go.
So I say this to parents all the time, is that when a child has suffered trauma in the early years, they tend to be about half their chronological age emotionally. So they have extreme lagging skills. If I'm a parent of a child who's 12, but that child consistently argues over the tiniest things and they're always wrong, then they're acting more like a 6-year-old. And I need to see them for who they are and how they are and meet them where they are and help them learn the skills of a 6-year-old, not of a 12-year-old yet. They're not ready. They're lagging in these years of learning. So when we expect a 12-year-old to act emotionally like a 12-year-old, but they're neurodivergent and they have many lagging skills, we're just making a huge mistake, right? We're just punishing them or angry with them or tired of them for their brains. That's like being mad at, a child who is paraplegic who won't walk. Well, won't they walk or can't they walk? And being mad at them because they can't walk or they're not walking is kind of ridiculous. You would never be mad at a paraplegic child who wasn't walking, would you? This is the same thing. They don't have the skill to do the thing you're wanting them to do at the age they are. And that's disappointing to parents. It's frustrating. Parents need a lot of support, but so does that child. The advanced mindset is we can all move away from focus on behavior and toward accommodation and skill building. That's the actual upshot, right? Moving away from focus on behavior, like behavior's everything. It's not. Behavior's communication in this model. Communication that I don't have the skill to do it the way you want me to. I don't have the skill to do it in a socially appropriate way. I don't have the skill to get the thing done. I don't have the skill to even understand what you're talking about. I don't have the skill to even hear you, right? Could be that. So teaching kids how to tune in, for example. Doesn't everybody know how to tune in? Well, guess what? No, they don't. So kids who are neurodivergent really don't know. And actually, a lot of people who are neurotypical don't know, right? And so how do you tune into somebody? Well, it's a mindfulness practice. It's a face the person. It's using eye contact. It's actually clearing your brain of the chatter and the noise about what went on at work or whatever, right? It's a skill for all of us, but we may not really be paying attention to the fact that we have this skill of tuning in and that we live with people sometimes that don't have that skill. We never really thought of them as neurodivergent, but perhaps we're living with people who are neurodivergent as well. And so then we have to be looking at, they don't really understand that they don't tune in. They don't really understand that they seem rude a lot, for example. Like adults seem rude a lot if they have some lagging skills and they didn't get accommodated and they didn't understand when they were growing up. I've had a lot of couples come into my office and one parent is frustrated with the other, or one part of the couple, they come in over their child about parenting, and one parent is mad at the other parent for being so rigid or so punishing or blah, blah. And as I spend time with them, I'm like, well, you're living with somebody who's neurodivergent, right? You're living with somebody who's on the autism spectrum, and they're not understanding what you're talking about, nor what I'm talking about. We have to help them, right? We have to accommodate them to help them accommodate their children. So that's possible too. So you have to kind of look at your own self, like what are you diagnosed with, or what are you undiagnosed with that you still have that might be in the way of your doing that for your child because it's never perhaps done for you. That's also an issue that comes up quite a lot. When we're talking about the neurobiological behavior model as the framework, we're talking about it to create change in the entire family life, right? And it does create change in the whole family because when you stop arguing, when you stop fighting, when you stop punishing, when you stop having blow-ups all the time, your family life changes, right? The dynamics in your family life changes because you become more understanding and empathic. You become more accommodating. I remember my son, and I've told this story a lot here, so a lot of you know this. He used to get in trouble by me because I would tell him, all you have to do, I'd go to work and I'd say, all you have to do is just clean off the counter. And he would be like, okay. And then I would come home in the evening, I'd be like, you didn't clean off the counter like I asked you to. And he would say, yes, I did, Mom. Yes, I did. I'm like, no, you didn't, because I can still see what you had for breakfast. Right? You had toast and you had jam and you had butter and maybe some peanut butter, right? Looks like all that right there. So you didn't clean off the counter. And he would be like, I did, I really did. And I'll be like, do it again. And I finally realized that he had a sensory processing disorder where his proprioception was really off. At first I just yelled at him a lot. And then one day I just said, show me how you clean the counter. And he did. And it was just as dirty as when he had started. And I'm like, show me again. And then he'd show me again. And he had such light proprioceptive touch that he was running a sponge across the counter and it was just slightly moving the crumbs and the peanut butter and the jam across the entire counter. And because he didn't have good sensory perception, he didn't even look, like when I clean something, I usually look to see if I actually cleaned it, like I look afterwards and go, oh yeah, good, perfect. Like, cleaning the stove. I don't just clean the stove and never look at it again. I clean it, stand back and go, yeah, okay, I got it. Not him. He just did what he was supposed to, ran the sponge in his proprioceptively diverse way, threw the sponge in the sink and left. So he would insist that he had done it because he never even looked to see if it was done. And I never really asked, like how he was doing it. So that's just, he was in trouble a lot for that very same behavior because I wasn't taking the time to pay a closer attention. Like, why is this happening over and over? Does he want to be in trouble with me every single day? That doesn't seem like him. I learned the hard way because I was so stubborn myself. There were a lot of things like that, right? So he had a lot of sensory processing issues, but he was really good at saying, okay. If I would say something to him, he would go like, okay. And I would assume that meant he understood what I was saying and he was going to either go do it or not do it. And then he would go and not do it or do the same thing again and be like, you said okay. You said, and he'd be like, oh, yeah, sorry. And then I realized he only hears the first 2 or 3 words and the last 2 or 3 words and none of the middle. He was trying to do it, but he just never heard half of it. And that took a long time for me to understand too. It's like, oh, he doesn't really understand most of what I'm saying because I'm talking too fast. It was really hard for me to slow down how I talked, but I needed to accommodate him. I kept trying to get him to listen. You need to listen when I'm talking. That's what I used to say. You need to listen when I talk. And he would be like, I am listening. I am listening. And I'm like, well, clearly you're not listening because you said you would, but then you didn't. And he would be really frustrated, but he didn't really know what was also happening. He didn't know he wasn't hearing it either. He thought he was hearing the whole thing. So anyway, there's just a lot to learn from kids who have these neurodivergent brains if we stop having so much hubris. I had so much hubris as a parent. How I saw the world, how I thought about the world was right. And that kids don't know what they're talking about or what they're doing, or they're just not doing what they're asked to do, which was just complete blindness on my part to who my kids were and what they needed from me. And they needed so much more and so much different and so much more gentle than I gave them in the beginning because I didn't understand that's what they needed. I thought they needed more stern, right? More strict, more enforcement of the rules, right? Because that's the way my parents were. And I thought that would work, but it didn't. So this is Eileen Devine, and she is the person that mom was referencing. I'm loath to show you the film because I don't want to get lost in the in the video, but it's so good. I really have to do it.
So the brain first parenting approach, again, rooted in neuroscience research, starts with the fact that there are many, many reasons why an individual's brain can be changed in function and structure. Research shows us that there's always over 40,000 different reasons that this can happen, which every time I say that statistic, it's amazing to me that any of us are considered neurotypical, right? So there's lots of reasons why the brain can be changed in function and structure. Physical changes to the brain impacts the way that it functions. That only makes sense. Behaviors are oftentimes the only symptoms. The brain and behaviors can never be separated. So this piece makes sense once you understand that, and that's something that neuroscience research has shown us again and again. It makes sense then that if a brain has been changed in its physicality, that we would see that through the behaviors, right? Because the two are always connected. What's tricky, and you all know this better than anyone, is that oftentimes, not all the time, but many times, our kids look what society considers neurotypical, right? And so those behavioral symptoms, those challenging behaviors, are misinterpreted, misunderstood, and they are incredibly vulnerable for misunderstanding, right? That connection isn't always clear to everybody else. When we can understand that and keep that at the forefront of our mind, which is hard work at times, then we can understand the source of that challenging behavior and actually do something to help them settle. Because the brain is a physical part of our body, and it has been changed in function and structure, I consider it, this model considers it, a physical disability. Anytime that our child has a neurobehavioral difference, it is a physical disability. And what would we do for any other child who has a physical disability? We would provide them with accommodations, right? So again, that logic there, most parents I find are like, oh, that makes sense. And they really want to see that actualized then in their parenting. That, of course, is the hard work, right? Taking it from theory and putting it into practice. But I'm going to give you a few ways, show you just a few ways that we can that you can start to do that. So brain-based differences are physical disabilities with challenging behavioral symptoms.
This paradigm shift takes parents from reacting to reframing. I love Eileen Devine, just so you know. You can see her work. She has lots of free work online if you just type in her name, and it's Divine, Eileen Devine. Her stuff is really, really good. So being in relationship with your child rather than seeing behaviors as the target for intervention and then missing out on developing accommodations to make your child more successful. So it's all about making your child successful through accommodation. The only way you could do that is to take your focus off of behavior. Saying that another way, it's doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. It's the definition of insanity, right? That's what we know. And yet we tend to stick with those punishments, right? We just stick with the consequences because we're so convinced that our kids will learn from them. But if you have a neurodivergent kid, you know that they might learn it one way, but they won't learn it another, right? It doesn't extrapolate. So it's really not effective.
Well, I really hope that you all enjoyed this episode, enjoyed these little nuggets from the past. If you want to listen to the full episodes, again, these were from episodes 5 and 16. Don't worry, C will be back as usual next week. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, remember, your love matters.
Hey parents, this is C. Get the help you need to end destructive and chaotic behavior in your home while parenting children from difficult beginnings. I know you need help, and the Love Plus parenting model actually works. I'm inviting you to work with me personally for 6 months in my virtual therapeutic parent program, and I guarantee you results or 100% of your investment back. How is that for a blue ribbon deal? I'm looking forward to working with you. See you on the inside.
Stop for a minute. Stop and breathe for a minute. Long it over your head. Try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute. Who you want to be for a minute. Don't get over your head. You're like everyone else, aren't you? You could gain from being a bit nicer. Knowing to talk and when to shut your mouth.
The UnMuted Love podcast is hosted by me, C. Eshelman, attachment and trauma specialist at the Attach Place in Sacramento, California. Our podcast producer is the amazing Siah Clark, and our theme song is Nicer by Houses on the Hill, licensed through Epidemic Sound. Thank you for being such loyal listeners here on UnMuted Love. I'll see you all next week.
You'll be just